Chapter 26. Too Black and Ugly. Over the years, I have had numerous conversations about my experience on the dating scene. Some people were enlightened with my journey, while others were surprised and even shocked. But I have come across one group of people that I find not only arrogant, but I find them extremely annoying because they feel that they are more qualified to speak on the subject than I am. They have the audacity to interpret my experience even though they wasn't there. And in some cases, they try to spin it like as though it's a figment of my imagination, when clearly I am the one that's most qualified to talk about my experience. So my inspiration on sharing this part of my journey on a dating scene with you is with this type of person in mind. But I need to issue out a warning. Some people will be offended by the contents of what's to follow. So once again, if you're easily offended by the truth, I suggest you do not listen to the following. June 1985. Me, Danny, and his younger brother took a trip to the Caribbean island of Grenada, visiting relatives and seeing the sights. Grenada is a very green and very hilly mountainous island. As for the sights, some of the places are absolutely breathtaking, surrounded by mostly white sand beaches. Now, the beach you really need to see. Grand Ants. The sand is white and the water is clear. If you drop your necklace or watch, you would see it glittering underneath the water. It's a typical postcard picturesque place. And in the north of the island, Bathway, it's quite a unique beach. It's like because it's got this massive rock separating the rough sea north of it, but beyond the rock where you would be. Sorry, I meant behind the rock where you are, not beyond. It's nice and calm. It's quite unique. The majority of people we came across were very friendly. Everyone that set eyes on us knew that we were foreigners immediately by our dress sense and our mannerism. And the majority of the time we were mistaken for Americans. However, there was a few that were still bitter about the American invasion that took place 2 years before, when the Americans had concern about Cuba occupying the island and building a long runway. As a result, Ronald Reagan, the ex-president, issued an invasion. On the odd occasion, you hear an angry voice shout out, "American tourists," or "fucking Yankee." But that anger was soon dissipated when they heard our accent. And it was even more dissipated when they realized that we had relatives in Grenada. So in their eyes, okay, we were just an extension of Grenadians, but we just happened to be born in the UK. Though 95% of Grenada is absolutely beautiful and I loved it, there is a 5% that's never really spoken about. And this 5% problem isn't only a Grenadian problem. It's a problem that you find throughout the Caribbean, in parts of Africa, definitely in India and Pakistan and places like that. This 5% problem, some people call it colorism. Me personally, I call it shaderism. Whereas the treatment you can receive from some people all depends on the shade of the color of your skin. Now, to be fair to the people of Grenada, I do not know what Grenada is like now. Because the last time I was in Grenada, it was all the way back in 1990, which was a very long time ago. So I can only give you the reference of what I personally experienced. Now, there were some women that appeared to be interested in meeting me and probably getting to know me. The full motivation behind that interest, I will never know. I wouldn't know whether they were genuinely interested in me as a person or what they can get from me. But likewise, back in the days of Drayton Manor High School, when one girl may say something kind to me, you would get someone else taking upon themselves to say something unpleasant to me. So on a few occasions, I'd be walking down the road, minding my own business, And maybe a girl may, as the Americans say, holler at me as such, and I may look and wave or say hello. And then one of her friends would shout out, "You're too black and ugly." On another occasion, you just overhear someone say, "You're too black." And the irony behind this, in many occasions, the women or girls who were saying this, they were either as dark as I am or even darker. In case you don't know, if I haven't given a description of myself, among black people, I would be considered dark skin. So for the benefits of those who are unfamiliar with the terminology used amongst black people, let's go through the charts or the shades. So I'm going to use celebrities so it gives you an idea of what shade I'm talking about. The artist known as Prince, and then you've got The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, Barack Obama, ex-American president. They will be classed as light-skinned. The actor and performer Will Smith, boxer, ex-boxer Mike Tyson, would be classed as red-skin or red bone. Eddie Murphy, Wesley Snipes, and the guy who played the Black Panther in the Avengers be dark-skinned. Now, even though Wesley Snipes and Eddie Murphy and myself are considered dark-skinned, we're not the darkest black person walking on the planet. The common misconception regarding black people is most people who are not black think there's only one type of black person. I mean, this is not really their fault because they could only know what they've been presented with. Even though they know that Africa is a continent, but they don't realize there's different types of Africans in Africa. They make the incorrect assumption that the only type of black person that walks the earth is a Bantu black. A Bantu black is, i.e. like a slave descendant, say Afro-Caribbean, Afro-American, the blacks that you see mostly on Western television. Not realizing you got pygmy blacks, you got Kushite blacks. Kushites, they would be your Ethiopians, your Sudans, your Somalis. Then you have the Sand people in South Africa, that region. Yeah, they have a very distinct resemblance to the Asians in the Far East, like Japanese, Chinese, etc. For example, the late Nelson Mandela. Look at his eyes and his cheekbones. And then you have the darkest Africans of all. Now, I struggle to say their names, so you have to forgive me if I get it wrong. The Nelilites. They're tall and very dark, almost a blue-black colour. They tend to come from the Kenya side of the continent. It's exactly the same principle that applies to Europe and other parts of the world. There are different types of white people in Europe. Let's say you took a white person from the Mediterranean region, such as Greece, Cyprus, or Italy. And then you compare them to someone from the Scandinavian countries, such as Norway or Finland. And you compare them to someone from Ireland or Scotland. You would get 3 variations of looks right there in front of you. Now, let me make something very clear. You are entitled to your opinions. You could call me black and ugly all day long, all week long, if it helps you sleep at night. My only issue is when my experience is either downplayed or denied. I've been accused of exaggerating, but it was me who was on the receiving end. I was the one that was there. They wasn't there with me. Or the other reaction I would get is when the person tries to downplay my experience, even though I'm the fucking one who was there experiencing this. They simply can't get their head around the fact that there are just simply unpleasant people out there. There's a saying I love: don't piss on my head and tell me it's raining. Now, I know for some black people listening to this, they would find this embarrassing and somewhat disgraceful, but it's not your problem unless you're the person who has been guilty of behaving in this disgraceful way yourself. All I would say to you, if you hear reference of a man coming on television or the radio and he makes the incorrect judgment of tarring all black women with the same brush and saying how unpleasant they are or whatever, you really don't have a say in that situation because you have had a hand in creating that status quo. Now I will focus my attention away from my experienced deniers. To understand where this mindset comes from, unfortunately, we have to hark back to the transatlantic slave trade. And how it went back in those days, the closer to the white, the better treatment you received. Hence the old terminology for a biracial person, half caste. If you're aware of the Indian caste system, you have a high caste and a low caste. But back in those days, someone who is half caste, one part of the caste is higher while the other is lower. And I don't need to tell you which caste was seen as higher and lower. So back in those days, if you were lighter skinned, probably as a result of, say, your mother being raped by the slave master and you coming out mixed race, you'd probably be working in the house, or you would be treated better from the slaves in the field. Hence the terminology, a house nigger and a field nigger. But as I stated before, sadly, this wasn't just restricted to the Caribbean. This mindset also went throughout the British colonies, such as India, Pakistan, and parts of Africa. And in the recent years to follow, I noticed the same ism going on. Such as when I was in Trinidad and Tobago, I noticed any adverts on the bill posters. The darkest skinned person you would see on the bill poster would be a redskin. Or people working in a bank or anything like that. You hardly saw any dark-skinned people working in the banks. However, I don't know what Trinidad and Tobago is like today. Again, the last time I was in that side of the world was back in 1990. If anyone has seen the film Coming to America, look at the undertone messages regarding the light-skinned woman compared to the dark-skinned woman. And the other film, More Money. Again, look at the way the dark-skinned woman was portrayed. Now, the gossip on the streets regarding Britain's Got Talent, the reason why Diversity won is because they were lighter skinned than the group called Flawless. However, that conspiracy was later on crushed because two dark-skinned brothers won Britain's Got Talent a few years after. So I suppose that conspiracy may have had legs, but it's sort of watered out with the fact that two dark-skinned brothers won Britain's Got Talent. Now, in closing, I would just like to say, I am not suggesting for 1 minute that it is right to tar a whole group of people with the same brush. I have acknowledged that I had a prejudice problem. I acknowledged that I was in the wrong for doing so. Hence why I referred to my prejudice as an illness. But you can't be surprised if a young man or a teenage boy ends up with the wrong and bad impression of a group of people, especially women, if he receives enough confirmation. And sadly, if they have similarities such as they're the same type, this will only create the illness called prejudice. Forewarned is forearmed. So if you are made aware of this, then you can actually do something to prevent it. If you refuse to acknowledge that this even takes place, if you don't give a shit, especially if you've been guilty of this behavior, as I stated before, then you're really not entitled to give any kind of protest if you are on the receiving end of being prejudged as a very unpleasant person. And you know what else I find funny about this situation? If you went onto social media such as YouTube and you used to click in like matters regarding the black community, for argument's sake, it wouldn't take very long for you to hear the terminology self-hate. Now, from my observation, that terminology that's bandied around is used incorrectly, because one of the popular references regarding self-hate tends to be aimed at black people who are involved in mixed relationships, or as they say in America, interracial couples. Now, what they seem to overlook, attraction and preference is not a choice. You simply do not choose who you're attracted to or what you prefer. Now, I'm not going to deny social conditioning, because it's clear some people associate being dark with being ugly. Hence the term too black and too ugly. But for me personally, your attraction score has nothing to do with the shade of your skin. I either find you attractive or I don't. As I've stated in a previous chapter, the irony with all of this, considering the historic racism towards black people, in my experience, the more positive and warmer welcome comes from women outside of my race most of the time. If it was a case that white women and non-black women were the ones calling me too black and ugly, then you could argue and say that shouldn't be of any surprise because these people have a track record of being racist towards black people. Whereas my most negative experiences comes from my own. I am no longer a Bible believer, but I do believe it says in one of the scriptures, a prophet has honour saved among his countrymen. In the modern tongue, his value is higher amongst people outside of his community. However, I reiterate, for purpose of balance, this obviously does not apply to all. I am not referring this to all black women, far from it. In the words of the late Bob Marley, who the cap fits, wears it.